Hello, thanks for coming out. So normally we have to express our gratitude to our partners on projects here for their endurance surviving the interminable pace of an exhibition that requires research, curating, and assemblage. In this case, I have to begin by thanking Shuruq Harb for agreeing to participate in this project and unbelievable pace of organization and assembly for a show with an installation that happened extremely quickly. The pain of a quick project is almost as intense as the agony of a protracted project. We met Shuruq this summer while we were on a workshop in the Middle East for the Collecting Architectural Territories project. And this is a project that contends with new modes of art collection, its institutions, its architecture, and its economies. And we traveled to the Middle East assisted by Sama Hajawi and Nora Cowie, who we also have to thank for all of their help in that workshop, but also for introducing us to an incredible array of people in the Middle East who could help us think through the problem of collecting. And it was in that context that we met Shuruq at the unreal location of the Snow Bar in Ramallah, where she described her work to us, showed us her book based on this project in Kiefer, and also totally seduced us by her narrative of this project. And so when we realized that we could squeeze a show in this fall, we decided to ask her to help us put this together very quickly, and she's been an indulgent and gracious partner in this process. So first, but thanks to Shuruq, and I'd also like to thank Reem Fadda for agreeing to be here tonight to have a conversation with Shuruq about her work and about this project. Reem is the Guggenheim Associate Curator of Middle East Art at the Dhabi project at Guggenheim. Most of you know us, but for those of you who don't, I'll fill you in a little bit. We're an architecture research gallery, which means that we research, curate, and produce architectural exhibitions, or exhibitions that are directly linked to architecture, but we also work with artists who have spatial practices whose work intersects in some way with forms of representation that are tied to architecture. And so there's a relative range of projects. Last spring we did an exhibition called Tony Orsler, UFOs and Effigies, which stretched the definitional parameters of architecture to some degree. And at first glance, you might think that Shuruq's project similarly stretches those parameters, but on closer observation, when you think of a project that deals with image circulation on the internet, the dissemination of those images within the city of Ramallah, and also the infrastructural limitations that help produce the economy of these images, you'll understand that the project is emphatically architectural. The gallery has its own infrastructural limitations, being a university gallery, and we rely heavily on the work of students and assistants and crew who work with us. So I want to thank all of them, and in particular the exhibition assistants, Katie Zeta and Michelle Morton, and the CCCP assistants, Katya Davidson and Elise Mendoza. I also want to thank Dean Wigley for his ever exuberant support for the gallery, and Adam Bandler for his collaboration on all the projects that we work on here together at the gallery. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Shuruq and Reem, and they're going to have a conversation about the work, and I'm going to more or less disappear. And after the conversation, we'll have drinks in the East Gallery. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you all for being here. And I know that Mark started with a group of thank yous, but I always find thank yous very important. So I want to start by thanking Mustafa, Arkawi, and Smahajawi for actually kind of creating that encounter for us to meet at Snowla and for me to talk to you about this work. And if anything, I kind of would hope that this encounter that we're having right now, even a lot of you are standing and I'm sitting down, and I do feel bad, that somehow like there is something that's created for you as well this moment. And of course, I'd like to thank Mark and Adam. It's been crazy kind of like putting this together at the last minute, but I really, really appreciate what you have done. And I thank you, of course, for agreeing to be part of this, Reem. And I like another few thank yous. I'd like to thank the person who helped me edit this video, Ramallah. And of course, again, thank you for coming. So I would like to think about this as kind of like an informal way of kind of talking through the project. I hope that you feel very comfortable touching the pictures, although they are very precious to me. But I have this inclination that although they are precious to me, I still want you to have the experience of looking through them and getting your hands a bit dirty, because if you notice, they are kind of low-res pictures. They have a little bit of dirt from being on the street. There is a lot of doubt of whether they are important or not important, and that has been kind of like the crux of my dilemma or my struggle with this collection. That let's say I inherited from Mustafa. Basically, Mustafa is a guy who was selling images on the street. Much like actually the guy who's selling images on the front of Columbia University. I don't know if you noticed him. Not very different. But he really, really intrigued me because every time I passed by his, you know, if you would say vending kind of display, street display, I was always, you know, filled with questions because all the time I was seeing a reflection of what was happening at that moment, what was popular, politically, socially, morally, whatever you would like to call it. And I spent a lot of time courting him, and not meaning that I wanted to marry him or start a romantic relationship. He's very young. I mean, he was probably like maybe 15 years old when I met him. And he always dodged all of my requests. He would either pretend that he was not the person who was in charge of the business, or we would schedule an appointment and he would not show up, and I kept buying images from him. These images are like 1 shekel or 10 shekels, not so expensive, but I would buy 100 over consecutive years, like from 2005, 2006, all the way up to 2010. And I think by the end of our conversations, he was convinced that I was not going away and that I was genuinely interested. And he agreed to meet me in a cafe, although that was quite awkward for him because he does think of himself as a devout Muslim, so an encounter with a woman for unknown purposes is a bit spectacle. But I don't know what happened. There was magic. And he opened up to me, and he told me a story about his life and about the images that we are consuming. And I love this parallel. It wasn't only about our consumption of the images, but it was also about his life. This business that he set up is something that he inherited from his parents. And years ago, in the early, like late 90s, he was, his uncle was smuggling images from China and Syria, and you know, through cargo things. I'm sure you've watched the video, so you kind of get a sense of the story. And then when he was finally able to get a hold of the business himself, he felt that actually waiting for shipments was not, you know, timely enough. So the internet was an obvious place to find the images, to meet the demands of the clients. And for that, I find the project very interesting. And towards the end of when he finally actually agreed to talk to me, he was in a moment where he was kind of trying to kill his business somehow. In part because of political questions around some of the images that he was reproducing. They were being censored, but also probably because people were not so interested in politics, or maybe trying to find another drug, another image, another drug, to substitute the political image into something more pop, more pop. And basically what I have inherited is the things that either were not sold because people were not interested, or because he had a moral problem continuing selling them. And as such, the collection is like very ambiguous. It is historical in some sense. It does give you an indication of what was being popular. It does kind of, if you look through it thoroughly, you get the sense of what was happening in the last 8 to 10 years. And the question it raises, are they still in demand? Or are they just simply leftovers? I mean, the issue of him feeling morally conflicted about the images is something that's quite significant, and I couldn't take that away. But anyways, in any case, what I really wanted is I wanted you to struggle with them as well. I have resisted so much as an artist to make a statement about the images. I didn't want to ever compile them together in some sort so that you kind of, because they are a bit kitschy. But I'm not trying to make a statement about kitsch. But my statement is more about how can this collection be useful? And I think more and more as we're gearing towards something that's immaterial, something that's dictated by our mind, something that's dictated by our iPods, where we're not actually printing anything at all. The fact that we have some of them printed becomes a marker. And for me, that was quite important. So I'll leave you with that thought, and I know Reem is going to prep me, like, she's going to ask me a lot of questions.
I'm going to harass her.
Yeah, so both questions.
So we do invite you to look at the images and see what the collection, or not the collection, that this kind of haphazard group of images that we have here, and try to decipher some of the meanings that are here amalgamated with all these groups of images together. And actually, I want to start with that question to Shuruq as well, which is, now that you have this kind of group of images, and you said that you have, there's so many layers to this project, obviously, but do you think, does it tell a story, like putting them together? Because does it tell a story for you or not, to start with?
Yeah, definitely, for me it tells a story. I think materially, like, part of the purpose of kind of dispersing them in that way and categorizing them in this way does...
What are the categories, Shuruq? I mean, how are you actually displaying them? And what are they for the audience to understand?
Okay, so a breakdown, a scientific breakdown somehow. So some of them are political from Hamas and Fadda, which are Palestinian factions, and they're kind of like rare illustrations of these Palestinian factions. Some of them are memorializing people who are politically significant, who have died over the last years. Saddam and others are one of them. And then, what else? And then a lot of them are also like these popular images of soap operas, Turkish soap operas. And this was actually really a breakthrough, both culturally and image-wise, because Turkish soap operas came into fashion, I think, around 2006 or 2008. I'm now not clear on the dates. But the Noor and Muhannad, which is the vast majority of this collection, it's like a soap opera based around this Turkish couple. And it's a couple that were struggling between modernity and tradition, and there was a lot of bootleg sex stuff going on, and children being born out of wedlock. But this is what became very popular in the Middle East, and actually this popularized Mustafa's business quite a lot. That people all of a sudden wanted these images. So you have a lot of those left over. Then you have like some very nostalgic images from film, like early Arab films. Some images of sports. Ronaldo and Ronaldinho are very popular, as well as others. I mean, I'm sure there were probably others that were completely gone. Odd images of female Arab pop singers and Arab pop singers from different times. Like some of them are from the 80s and the 90s, and some of them are more contemporary. And then you have, like, of course, reality TV, like all the what I would equate to American Idol kind of stuff. So they're very, and then you also have like children's photos and some nature, like horses, wrestlers. So it's a weird mix, but yeah.
So we would say that the large group of images are representing popular and cultural references for sure.
Definitely.
One question I have is, and I think the audience would benefit from them knowing your process, because this is obviously, as you were talking about this has been a long-term project that has taken you years in the making. But beyond that, the articulations of how you've tried to think through how do you present it to an audience has taken many shapes and forms. It was a book to start with, and why a book? I mean, I know that we had that conversation, but I think thinking it through again, and this display, and are you even is this display the kind of last frontier for this? And another question that I'm gonna link for you to think about is, you said they're precious to me, but they're low-res printed materials. And here I am, a Guggenheim Curator institution, freaking out because people are touching the images. Because for their longevity, if you're thinking about it, conserving them, this is already a hazard. So if they're precious to you, I'm telling you, you're ruining them already. So this is one thing about also this idea of like the material burden that some of these images have within them. And I know that we also talked about that, but maybe we can talk about it after we talk about your process.
Actually, I want to start with that, because for me, like, contemplating the precious element of these images, I mean, how ridiculous would it be to put these like in museum kind of displays? I felt that that was kind of like betraying the project. There is something popular about the accessibility of the project. And I also, like, in relation to other works that I've done, I've kind of really contemplated this idea, like how, like, also with archaeology and architecture and all that sort of thing, like, once you declare something an object of the past, then you can't touch it. And they are from the past, but I want you to touch it. That is kind of like my resistance to, I feel like it's okay for things to be destroyed. Let's keep touching them. I mean, I feel like somehow in the end, if they disappeared, it's because we've all used them. Like, we've touched them, we've like, something happened to them. And for me, that trace of what's happening to them is already a material reaction. And that. Now, having said that, and having spelled out this conflict of something being precious but also equally accessible to people, for me, the preservation process actually happened through the book, because the preservation happens through the preservation of the story, which is the story of Mustafa and my encounter with him. So even if the images disappear, and I do have digital copies of them, and okay, I must say, like, in New York, it was almost impossible to produce actual photographs, like, photo lab photographs. This industry, even in Palestine, is almost gone. Like, you're not gonna have this, like, you go to Walgreens and like other places to make quick prints. This is something that's being depleted. But I am not nostalgic about that being gone at all. But for me, the preservation happens is in the story. It's about people understanding. For me, the story is the main character in this whole exhibition, in the book. It's about what he was reflecting on. It's about not being able to quantify it. And I think this one question about not being able to quantify digital proliferation, yes, as she said it, yeah, it's not, I don't have the solution to it, you know, like I don't have materially, I don't have a solution to it. But I feel that the story is one of the answers, you know. Hearsay, you know, like the stories that you're told by other people, that's how an idea is preserved. And so that's kind of, and I forget all of the other questions that you asked.
No, but I'm actually going to I want you to think through with that a little bit further, because I think what you said is kind of also profound about like you wanting the people to like touch and not feel that that history is something that they cannot immediately and materially connect to, which I think is really important. But at the same time, and I think that's an interesting line of questioning to what we have taken for granted in terms of how we treat certain objects of history. And there's a fetishization, if you want, in that kind of relationship. But there is the other kind of constant truth, which is there is continuity. I mean, basically what happens is that if you want to preserve something and you want to preserve the history, you need to like, there's a certain level of conservation that needs to be maintained so that materially that thing remains on to tell the story, or else it won't. I mean, there's that kind of logic. And I think it's very interesting, and I know that we talked about this, but I think I want to share this with the audience, which is if we apply it to the Palestinian context in particular, where material accumulation of history is basically jeopardized on a constant day-to-day basis. So our institutions are jeopardized, archives are jeopardized. For the past history, I mean, this is the kind of call of nation to build a level of your own history, to assert your modernity. You need that accumulation of wealth of material and the things that tell your story. And that is not happening in the Palestinian context, which I think is an interesting way to read your kind of the intuitive way of the fact that you're trying to collect something of a recent history from whatever is available, right? Like, how do I amalgamate the story being told, not through references of things that are tangible, that tell a story of a place. So I think that you're capable of doing that, and when he gives you this, you know, wealth of images, maybe I'm reading a little bit more into it, but it also tells a story of the gaps of the story of the Palestinian kind of contemporary history. So what do we not know? What is the audience not capable of seeing from 2005 until today? What are the inert, like, responses? This is not just people wanting, you know, I mean, in the basic kind of situation here in New York, if you're buying, you know, a picture of, I don't know, like Michael Jackson or Kim Kardashian, you know, which people do when tourists buy them, and they'll buy, you know, the Statue of Liberty. This is a trace of you, like, actually buying something to commemorate a moment in your history. What if that situation is you don't have the Statue of Liberty? You can't even move from one location to the other, and you can't even imagine one city to the other. Like, you don't have continuity in your material memory of a location and a specific space. So what do these images start to represent? Like, that fantasia plays a sort of, it becomes a replacement to the absence of a real reality and a materiality of a geography and a space. So they do become architectural kind of imaginaries to a nation state. I think this is like a further reading, if you want, from my perspective. But I think putting them together, they start to tell something. And I think, of course, it's like a sense of, yes, of normality, like the need for a normality, but also even more like, and we talked about the fact that when you are building, what is happening also on the political realm in Palestine, which I think is also an interesting read, where there is, let's say, a political situation which is defunct, too. Like it's not working. How does that fit into that narrative for you, personally?
I mean, I feel like what you're saying is so profound. Okay, so one thing I want to stress is that I do encourage other readings. I do encourage any reading of the project. Actually, I have to say that as an artist, I was trying not to force any kind of conclusion. I wanted, there was something really nice about me kind of like going through them all and trying to like figure out the people that I didn't remember, and I never wanted to take that away from the audience. I kind of like wanted to keep that open, that, you know, and I know I'm speaking to an American audience where maybe a lot of these references don't call up something, but I think that you are still going to be able to read a message of some sort. Now, in terms of what it means politically, I think that what Mustafa was doing was subversive because the image was traveling. And for me, that was like the moment of like me being completely seduced by the project.
Yeah, you were telling me how it's being smuggled.
Yes.
And I think that's interesting.
Yeah. So even though, and if you notice, like, so Angelina Jolie is now part of like Palestinian culture, so is Brad Pitt. But that's actually what I'm trying to say is that I think the collection kind of represents something that's not kind of like limiting a reading of visual culture in Palestine in terms of iconography, like specific iconography, but it's kind of opening it up to what's being inserted from the outside, what's being demanded from the outside. So for me, the story of the image traveling is an important one. And that it needs to smuggle through is kind of like this expression of the conditions of Palestine, where movement is not free, where a historic relationship with Syria, like actually, so maybe to state an obvious, like Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan, we're all part of the same region. The conditions of the contemporary wars that we're having is kind of a condition of separation. So the fact that we still relate culturally and that we're smuggling images through was kind of like an expression of that collection. Now, what does it mean in terms of like larger questions of institutions and preservation and collections, which I know, Mark and Adam, that's like kind of like at the crux of what we were trying to explore when we were traveling through the Middle East. I think I kind of represent maybe an alternative. I don't feel like the responsibility of an institution, and that's why you can touch the pictures. Also, like, now our reality as Palestinian artists who've worked with archives has slightly shifted because suddenly we have a Palestinian museum that's being built. And so this kind of created a whole set of questions. Like, I think on some level, we as artists have this idea that we're somehow, even if not directly, indirectly safeguarding something. We knew that we were not creating the main narrative, but I think somehow now that I know that there are people who are willing to dedicate their time to the main narrative, I feel so much more at ease with the fact that I'm not. You know, I think what I'm offering is something substantially different in terms of what a collection means and how you deal with it.
But actually, okay, again, because I think archives, as much as they are about, again, maintaining that history, but they lead you to a point where the idea of having history is that you have that history there so you can learn from it to go towards the future. So if we're talking about the absence of the archive, like these images are here to compensate for the absence of an archive of today. And you're not going, I mean, of course these images have images of Nasser and, you know, like down like 50 years and more, but they do have images of the present. So if I'm going to go a step further and I'm going to say what you are doing with these images is a sense of trying to evoke the sense of why we need an archive. So what is there in a collection? What is the impetus that is required in a collection? Not because you are doing this, applying it to like the locale of the Palestinian situation. I'm not saying that, but I think what Shuruq is trying to do, and I don't mean to pigeonhole the project and localize it into that realm, but it is really universal because in the end of the day, there is a gap. You can apply the kind of the Palestinian situation, which is unlike any others. It's like the bare bones of any kind of citizen rebuilding project, and look at it in that kind of way. So where there is no archives, you start to ask the question in the Palestinian situation, do we need an archive? Do we need a state? Do we need an institution? Do we need a ministry? Like, we can ask all of these questions because we don't have any. So we're at a privileged there. Mind you, we don't have anything. So it sets it up as a place where you can actually interrogate all the startups, the kind of truths of why. So when you do that with also the most benign materials, I think you're setting it up even further. And I would go further when I ask you, I think the political impetus in this is saying, these images are trying to say, I want to be able to read a possibility of how I can create a political future. Like where the archive can actually lead you to civic education, right? Like how can I move forward? And I think particularly in the Palestinian situation now, especially post-Oslo, but it's the status of the world as well, post-capitalism, neoliberal economies, etc., where you have that kind of an abyss in political citizenship and in civic engagement, like in society and in the way politics is run. So what I think becomes the kind of truth that you're trying to like spoon up is, so where do we learn? And how can we create political impetus to do something, right? Where is the political drive that I can excavate from an archive? Maybe that's too much, and I don't want to like shock you, but
Yeah.
but this is like, that's one thing. And I mean, maybe we can open it up.
But I just wanted to say one thing. Like I'm happy that you know you're able to draw conclusions from what I'm doing. I have to say like that was I was never trying to force a conclusion. I think really like it seems almost like maybe naive and nostalgic, but I've accepted that there are gaps in memory and that things get lost. And so I really love the fact that this collection is kind of like flawed in some ways. For me, that makes it more valuable. The fact that it's not going to be able to say anything, and we should accept that it doesn't. And all of memory and all of our emphasis to archive is kind of like trying to get over that loss. But I love the loss. I mean, again, I feel like I'm sounding like
no, I mean, that is totally
like, nostalgic about it. But it's not that. It's okay. I'm correcting myself now. It's not only about nostalgia. I think that somehow, and this has been a hard lesson to understand as an adult, that like part of like moving on is letting go and accepting that something always gets lost. And I kind of like our inept memory. Like I love how we don't, like there's false things when we remember things. And they're not complete. And it's honestly like that has been at the center of the struggle of how to display them. I don't want to give you a complete narrative. It's incomplete. Please enjoy it.
Yeah, that'd be good. Seamus Haney, the late poet, actually used to say that art is actually beauty and pity. So we're not eternal. Nothing's eternal, right? So think beauty dies. And so the interesting thing is that the manner dies with the matter, right? So the idea of constructing these archives to preserve memory, right? Imagine all the diasporas, the Polish, everyone, or Silesia, we're all, wherever you look, there's been diaspora and change, right? So I really like your comment at the end, which it's the gap, it's the melancholia, it's that loss that you're actually curating in your kind of finding the nuances in that curation. But it's actually a new thing. It has nothing, it's a construct that you've created, geographical construct, right? And I think that's the beauty of the art. It's actually your construct. It may not even pertain to any reality.
Yeah, and I think one other thing that I wanted to add is that if we take it away also from the Palestinian situation, it becomes also a global collection on its own, right? Like, it has the global proliferation of image that you're talking about and the immateriality that we're in relation to. That's another aspect of your project that you're dealing with. And we are all having to come to terms with it. Like, that idea of what is at stake when the material starts to fade away, but it's also a truth that we need to face up to, like, ever more. So that is a reality.
But if I may, it seems to me that a kind of double subversion when you talked about Mustafa's process as being somewhat subversive, because as I understand it, his uncle and he were sort of importing images which were sort of physical, either from China or someplace. And then you moved to the internet in terms of taking the immaterial and somehow making that a kind of material thing, which then you turned into a kind of archive, which really only existed or partly existed on the internet. So I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit more about his process, because it seems as if in that process he was actually curating a history which perhaps did or did not exist in a certain place, which is quite different than the sort of importation of images from Asia or from China or wherever.
Absolutely. And if I could walk around like the gallery space, I could point out the ones that were smuggled as opposed to the ones that were printed. And absolutely, the thing that was very fascinating is that he could comment directly on contemporary culture because of the internet. So he would be printing images of Arafat because he could. He went back into the archive, whichever he found on the internet, to kind of like excavate other images that were kind of long obsolete and then bring them back into contemporary memory. And I did find that very profound. I almost always refer to him as a newspaper of some sort, because if you go to him, you know what's on everybody's mind. And I think that is precisely the difference between smuggling something in that takes a lot of time. And it's kind of like ironically because the demand, and his ingenuity, how do you say when somebody's in football?
Forward thinking.
Yeah, he was very smart as a businessman. His intuition was very smart, both in terms of business, because what he created was something entirely different. There you go, on the street, you are confronted with your day-to-day, and that is precisely what's unique. And I think that's kind of what offers a historiography of some sort for the collection. Now, and I've struggled to kind of describe what the internet has meant in our context. So because we're under Israeli occupation, we do have somewhat good internet service in comparison to a lot of the other countries. Importantly, I want to point out, especially Lebanon, we have better access to internet than Lebanon. You're Lebanese? No, but okay, so we have better internet than other countries.
They don't even have electricity.
They don't. Okay. And water. But anyways, that's a different conversation. But the fact that it's not to say that there was no internet and he was printing. His industry was also dying because more and more people had computers and they could access them freely. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually want to follow up on Mario's question. I think it's an amazing project. I just want to thank everybody involved for bringing it here. And it's amazing because it's an archive project that has traveled, and every time it travels, it kind of changes its relationship. So it went from Mustafa to you, it's going to you to us. It's really interesting, and in terms of the materiality of what this thing means in its various contexts is also really fascinating. But the question I have about how we engage this material artifact and its meaning has to do with the idea of social contract. Like, what do I as a viewer have in relationship to this image in this space at this moment, which might be very different from the relationship Mustafa might have with the person he's selling it to. And I bring this up because a South African artist came here last week named Terry Kurgan, who is working with an archive that she produced within an immigrant community in Johannesburg, a migrant community, where people are going in and out from various parts of Africa. And it has a lot of similar issues about history, archive, contested relationships between people who are citizens and non-citizens. And that the internet drastically changes that relationship around what the image means and who's reading it. And she used it strategically to, in fact, bring visibility to a population that was, in fact, vilified and marginalized within the larger sort of free post-apartheid South Africa. So I'm wondering if you could say more about this social contract with the image as it circulates from site to site to site, like to here. Like, what is our relationship and how should we understand these?
I feel like your relationship is defined by you. There's no forced meaning. I'm sure that a lot of people might not be able to read some of the references. I think the fact that they are from the internet and they're printed, that's kind of like something that grounds it into something that we all understand. But I don't expect, like, I'm not trying to, I don't think that it will communicate. As everything, I think things will get lost. So I don't expect you to kind of, or anybody else to kind of like go in and understand the Middle East through the pictures or understand Palestine. I think what happens is that you can view them as an image outside of a context. And that brings a meaning of its own. So you might be able to enjoy somebody's pose. You might recognize some of like the technical aspects of the 80s and 90s, like, you know. You might see that soap operas are the same, regardless. So like, you know, when we were installing, like I had a few students helping out, and they're like, oh, like this couple, like about Huda and Muhammad, and like, why are they so popular? And so there was an instant recognition that this is kind of like a soap thing. And I think these are things that are like maybe globalized, globally kind of recognized, without the specificities of them. But I think, if you ask me, I think the hope is that hopefully this raises other questions for you, that then you can find specific, specific references too. Because I mean, the proliferation of images in New York alone, you know, is, you know, do you recognize half of the images that you see? Do you even recognize some of the images that you see? And I hope that that kind of opens up that question, and the fact that you don't have any materiality over your memory. It's really not about kind of like giving you a culture specific. I'm not trying to make meaning, like give you a specific meaning about something.
Yeah. I find very interesting what you have here, but I especially find interesting how it seems like population anywhere around the world have this desire to have this archive, to have this grounding, they have this symbolic representation, be it Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, or being some president or some important figure. And I mean, it's quite amazing how there's this desire to build a series of heroes or pseudo-hero or fabricated hero by whichever means. It makes me think in Croatia and Bosnia, where they had so many war and problems when they had money from the European Union to reconstruct some square, there was some roundabout where they were supposed to put some sculpture, and they couldn't agree on any sculpture because every general or former person had killed half of the population one way or another. So they had a statue of Rocky, another roundabout into the statue of I think it was Samantha Fox or some other people of really like popular culture of the 80s, and that was voted around in the village or in the city, like who do we want to be as a sculpture, and that was the memory that people wanted to have. So I find this popular culture, this desire for having heroes, for having some sort of, even if it's complete, we think of it be completely disconnected, but it has meaning for people. And so I think it's great to have it as a section here, but sometimes it comes into really the everyday life of, the built environment or the buildings, or, I mean, we could see that for us architects, a lot of buildings have facade like imported from here or there, and that kind of importation.
So like to touch on your thing directly, so another project that I did was entitled All the Names, and it's about the street names in Ramallah. And it's, so like the municipality had a project where, because usually we don't have street names, and so because they're prepping Ramallah as a future capital, it was quite important to have street names. And when I was looking through the directory of who are the people that were the streets named after, I encountered, so actually even in Ramallah we have these urban physical manifestations. We have Freud, Picasso, a lot of other people that you wouldn't directly connect to. But that also became a very interesting reading for me. I mean, when you connected all of those names of those people, from Islamic history, from Christian history, from political history, to, artistic, like if you collected the names of those people, you would never see them on the same graveyard. Yet they were all in Ramallah. And so I mean, just kind of like to affirm what you were saying.
One last question, and we'll move on.
Like throughout the whole talk, you guys were kind of referring to this collection as an archive. And I just wanted to ask, like, all the images here are of, from the internet of people that are either, really well known in soap operas, or of, like not normal, on the street, everyday people. And so, like, not to compare this body of work to like something like the Arab Image Foundation, or like images from the 60s of people that just came to a photo studio, and then like it became a documentation of the everyday. And the same as Terry Kurgan's in Africa, like it was just literally people off the street. And so when you look at a collection like that, it is a collection of, or it's an archive of specific people at a specific moment in time. And whereas the collection here, like, how much do you think it actually says of the people that are that it's being sold to, or is it not? Is it completely not the same? Like, would that be a completely separate work? And if so, is there anything like that being done today, or do we just see these people on the news now? Because like in at a time where like an image of like just getting your photograph taken isn't really something special anymore. A photograph, for it to be noteworthy, has to be a photograph of someone, name. So what do you think? So basically, that's my question. Do you think that this replaces the need for this really like local documentation, or is that being done?
No, but I mean, kind of like, because I know something like the Arab Image Foundation exists, I don't feel like I need to replicate their work. That's not my task. Actually, they have a lot of projects in Palestine going through family archives. I think this is more, I don't know if it's an archive or a collection or just random stuff. But for me, it's about the desire of what people wanted. And I think that speaks of something that actually doesn't exist in a family archive. It's about desire, it's about fantasy. It's about, at some point, wanting a picture of Saddam and then wanting a picture of Noor and Muhanna. It's more about how people are interacting with images, which is very different than being documented as an image. And for me, actually, that is also an important kind of like seduction in the project. It's not about having Palestine in display. It's about what Palestine fantasizes about and how that's so globally connected. And because we are kind of like confined in space, they were smuggling things through China, they were getting them off from the internet. And I think that is very specific, like if we're going back to the specifics of the Palestinian condition. But I wouldn't make it only about Palestine. I think that is specific about how we all, it's not about being documented by an image, it's about the image that you're pursuing. And I think that's the difference. And that's why I struggle with it as an architect.
I would just also like to emphasize, I think also and this is something we discussed, which is what Shuruq is leading to is this idea of the imaginary. What is it to imagine your future? And I think in this situation, what you have here is, this is very much of a specific and a locale, and it has like its own, but it's also global. Like these images are the tie to the global. So here you have a narrative, I think, of how can I imagine like a situation for me from in this kind of global scenario of images. And not from only my family household told stories. So I think it talks about absence, it talks about what is not there, but it also allows for this idea of what do I really want? How can I imagine that future? And I think maybe that's the very different way of treating this collection / archive / bag of goods.
Great. Thank you all for coming out, and thank you, Reem and Shuruq, for a really great conversation that opened up the project and the images to us in an incredibly complex and layered way. We're about to do something that's strangely taboo and exciting. We're going to invade France through the East Gallery, which now belongs to the Maison Française, and this is unheralded. So I want you all to join us while Palestine invades France.